Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me. My name is Christopher Petruzzi, and I'm going to be running this session entitled Unlocking Creative Potentials. What we're going to be doing here today is talking about how we can unlock creative potential in any of the work that we're doing. So for me, I am the manager of user interface and multimedia design here at Seton Hall University. I work at the Teaching Learning Technology Center, and we deal with everything from graphic design, video production, web design, and anything that deals with creative and digital media. And so when I say unlocking creative potential, I mean it for really anybody. You don't have to be a designer. You don't have to be a video producer. You don't have to be a creative professional to utilize some of the design principles that we're going to be talking about today. I like to take these things, these principles, and help people apply them to everything that they're working on. It could be something as simple as a worksheet, a spreadsheet, letterhead, even just in your own notes, thinking about using design to make things more easily readable, digestible, and understandable. Because that ultimately is the goal of really good design, is to make things easy to understand for your viewers. Now, whether your viewer is just you and you're using it in your own materials, or if you're creating a poster or a website or something that you're trying to convey a message, information to anybody that's on the end and receiving your communications. So like I said, my name is Chris Petruzzi. I've been working at Seton Hall in a creative capacity for a while. I also do my own freelance work. So I've been involved in a lot of different creative media throughout my career, and would love to talk about some of the things that I use every day when creating designs or talking about creative production. And here at Seton Hall, and really in my own life, I've always tried to put the emphasis on creative technology and using creative technology to enhance my own workflow and then the workflow of our team and the workflow of the university. So I started a very long time ago working in Adobe Photoshop and working on computers and doing graphic design, and that's where I kind of grew my own passion to want to work on this type of stuff. So I've always been interested in particularly the Adobe Creative Suite, but any program used for design and media production. And here at Seton Hall, we're very fortunate to be Adobe Creative Campus, to put more importance on creative technology on campus. So here, everybody on campus gets access to Adobe Creative Campus. So it makes it really easy for us to recommend tools and to go over design and media production here at the university. So anybody watching this, if you're interested and you don't have access to the Adobe Creative Suite, you could sign up at shu.edu/Adobe, get set up with your own Adobe Creative Campus account. Gives you access to the whole Creative Cloud suite so that you can work in design, video production, Photoshop, Illustrator, InDesign, Adobe Premiere. All of the great programs that are in the Adobe Creative Suite are available to you. So what I want to do today is talk about 6 design principles for you to use on your next project. Now, these things are pretty, once we go through them, you'll see that they're pretty simple, right? It's nothing groundbreaking, but it's things that you could think about that'll give your design, your project, whatever it is, a little bit more of that professional look and feel. And that's really what design is. It's creating something that looks clean and looks professional, and like I said, is easy to understand for you and for your user to kind of digest that information. So we're not going to talk about anything groundbreaking. It's just taking that extra step to make your design and your layouts look clean and easy to understand. That's usually like the last probably like 10-15% of what makes a design go from really great to looking even more professional. It's that attention to detail. And that's kind of what we're going to discuss today. So the example that I'm going to use in the beginning is very simple. It's pretty much like just text, maybe just one image, and it's just to prove a point of how to create something that looks really clean and is easy for your user to understand. So this is the example that we're going to use today. Like I said, nothing fancy, nothing that anybody couldn't do with Microsoft Word or in Adobe InDesign or Adobe Express even. Very simple example, but once we start to look at it and talk about the design principles that we're going to go over today, you'll start to see the difference between something that you really paid attention to when you were making your design and thought about how you were sending out the information to your user. So the left-hand side, now for these, we use placeholder text because I want to focus on more of the form of the design itself. So we're not really paying attention to what the actual text itself says. But if we look at the example on the left compared to the example on the right, immediately just looking at it, we can see cleaner lines, cleaner spacing, and more thought put into how the user was going to step through the design. When we read and when we view a poster or we're reading a book or anything, we're going to move and stair step left to right, right? So we're starting off, what's the main information? Okay, I know it's open house. What's my second piece of information that I'm going to hit to? It's going to give me some kind of context to what it is. It's like, okay, what is this? Where is it? When is it, right? And I'm moving through. Then I'll see an image. Okay, I know this is going to be on campus. Go through some of the rest of the information. Maybe that bottom paragraph or the few 3 paragraphs gives me some supporting information. And then I go back to my down to the right, finish up at my main call to action, which will probably give me information, contact information, and where I'm going to go to figure these things out. Now, when you look at the example on the left-hand side, you'll see that there's a lot of like visual clutter that was added to try and separate some of these items. So like underneath the blue block in that text down there, you see the lines in between the text. There's no spacing between the text. All of this becomes just a kind of a visual clutter for your viewer, and it makes it hard for them to parse out the information and to understand the message that you're getting across. Whereas if we look on the right-hand side, we have proper alignment between different elements, and we're creating form between the text and the image there. So you get those really clean, sharp lines that go along the left edge from the image down to the text, helps your eye follow it down and be easy for you to read as you go through. And even on the right-hand side, we've chunked out these bits of information using subtitles, using proper negative or white space in between the items, and using proper spacing. So a lot of times, if you were looking at a design or a poster or something like that, you might see that whoever was designing it might put blocks or lines or shapes in between them to try and create separation and make things a little bit easier to read. Sometimes that's not going to work, and it's going to give you the problem that we see on the left-hand side where everything is really squished together. There's no spacing. It's fatiguing for your eye when you're trying to read it and trying to parse out the information, especially if we had actual like text in here and real call to action. Your user is going to lose that. They're not going to be able to see what you're trying to accomplish and what you're trying to get across for them. So it's going to be hard for them to receive that information and parse all of that information out. So this is just the exam, and I'll come back to this later after we've gone through the 6 design principles that we're going to go over today, and we'll see how you can use them to clean up your designs, clean up your layouts, clean up any of the documents that you're working on. Doesn't have to be designed. You don't have to be an artist. You don't have to be a designer to pay attention to these things and use them in your everyday work, everyday life. That's why I like to use a simple example like this, because it becomes easier to understand that, hey, we can all use these design principles to create our own layouts and get the information across to the viewer. So the first design principle that we're going to talk about is balance. So we want to achieve visual balance by arranging elements on the page. So in that original example, and I'll just jump back to it, we're balancing out the content throughout the page. So we have a large header, telling us that it's open house, supported by the secondary subtitles, register today, telling us, okay, I know where this is, I know what it is, giving me all that information. And we're balancing it out through the page. Now this one we can see it's pretty symmetrical in the design. If I did a slice right down the middle, you can see that both sides are both evenly weighted. Even though there's more text on the right-hand side, the image helps balance things out, gives me these nice 2 lanes that I can then have the viewer come straight down and get down to that call to action. So thinking about balance and balancing the items on your page in this sort of manner. Now you can always use balance in a sort of more artistic manner. So if we're going through here and we're putting items on the page, we're putting this in here, and then we have examples of posters. So whenever I'm going through design, I'll always take a look at posters that I'm putting together. I always like to draw inspiration from different types of media. So if we're looking at movies, we're looking at magazines, anytime I'm doing something, I'm always going to go ahead and research and look something up and say, hey, what's my inspiration for you? If you just go ahead and Google something, Google, hey, best poster designs of 2024 and take a look at movies and things like that. Drawing inspiration from different mediums to get ideas, to go over things and figure out, hey, I like that. Maybe I can incorporate that in one of my designs. And so these are two good examples of just, shows for bands, for posters and stuff like that. But examples of balance, if I look at the left-hand side, I can see we have another example of a kind of symmetrical. It's split right down in the middle. If I go ahead and slice that right down the middle, it gives me kind of an even balance between the two. But the one on the right-hand side, we have more of a asymmetrical balance. We're using that negative space all the way up the top, kind of makes your eye go right down to the bottom to the call to action. So you're kind of leading the viewer down there. And it's also an artistic choice because they've got the imagery of the seesaw there. So they've got a seesaw that's kind of, leaning towards the bottom. So it's giving you that extra kind of asymmetrical balance where you're coming right down towards the bottom there. So the next principle we'll talk about is proximity and unity. So depending on how near elements are between one another, we're creating a relationship between them. The easiest way to understand this is thinking about like that first example, using headers, using subheaders, using subtitles, and then body copy. So it gives you that hierarchy. You create a relationship. If I put a piece of descriptive text or body copy underneath a header, I know that it goes along with it. Like when we saw with the open house, I can see, hey, this is an open house, and it shows me the date, the time, and all that stuff is related to it. By grouping those things together, you infer a relationship between them, and it tells the user, okay, I know these two things go together, or I know these two are relating to one another. And you can see this pretty easily by just using shapes and putting things together. The groups of images here are both exactly the same, but by just putting them together in one group on the left-hand side, we're inferring a relationship. Whereas if I take all the basketballs and all the T-shirts there on the right-hand side, we're creating two separate groups. So we're inferring a relationship. They are together, not only because they are the same objects, but now they're in two completely separate groups. Same thing here with the images of the pirate mascot here. Same exact image placed throughout the board on the left-hand side, but if I group those other on the right-hand side, they're put together for a reason. So it's two separate groups, and we're inferring a relationship between the two. The next one, and this is really a big thing when we look at that original example, and something that you want to pay attention to and use for all of your work and all of your presentations is alignment. It's one of the major things that, like I mentioned, like that last 10 or 15%, paying attention to alignment is so huge in making something look professional and clean and easy for your viewer to understand. There's a great way to make sure that you do have it set up correctly. In PowerPoint, in Word, in InDesign, any single program related to page layout and design, you can create a grid. You can put a grid over your canvas, similar to the way the screenshot is here, and you can see the lines and you can align everything. Some of the apps will do automatic snapping and tell you, okay, I know that this box of text is lined up with this shape or image above it, and they'll snap to a grid and help you keep that aligned. So it's something that's super important that you want to pay attention to because it'll give you the ability to keep everything crisp and clean and make a lot of sense for your users. So we have a couple different examples here. The one in the middle, clear is the one that we would want to go with if we're going with the left align of all of our text, balanced with the image on the right-hand side. if you look on the left, there really is no thought to it. It's kind of really extremely bad that how everything's like stepped in there. And it's an extreme example, but even just like a few, like 5 pixels, if we look at the text underneath Go Pirates, if it was even just a little bit misaligned from the underneath that Go Pirates, it doesn't create that really nice shape. If you look at the middle example, right underneath Go Pirates, right, we're perfectly aligned from that G to the E in the word underneath it, and then the rest of those bullets down there. It gives us such a nice shape through there. One of the great things that I love about design is creating form and shape through objects and objects on your page that aren't necessarily shapes. So creating blocks of content using text and making it look like it has its own form without, putting a box around it or putting a line underneath it. There's no reason to do that. You might have underneath the Go Pirates and the subtitle underneath there, maybe we would have put like an outline box or an underline beneath there, but there's no reason to, because the negative space and the space between both of those items, it makes its own form and then gives us these easily chunked out pieces of information that our user can view. And that continues straight down the page. Now, the example on the right, it's centered, and we have competing, alignment there. So it's just that thing of paying attention to how am I aligning it. So not saying that you can't center something. There are definitely examples where you might want to center some of the text, but you would still want to pay attention to your alignment on the page and your spacing between items. And so we would use alignment not only to make things clean and make things look really neat and easy for our user to understand, but also we can use alignment as a visual tool, as a design tool. If you look on the left-hand side, we have a poster for a show, and they really went and used the alignment there to great visual effect, going straight down the large N in the word sound and using it as like a pillar to create form through those words. And really it catches your eye. You follow it straight down to what the information is, what the call to action is, and then you get the viewer can understand what the information is for. The second example, obviously, infographic pieces are great examples of alignment and creating form throughout a design that's primarily just text and a few other shapes. But it works really great here because, especially with an infographic style thing, you get these easily chunkable stats and quotes and pieces of information that are throughout your design, and they're easy to understand, or easy for me to just take one bit of that information from this whole layout. It might seem like it's visually busy or overwhelming, but because it's perfectly aligned and balanced throughout, it's easy for me to take a look at and see that the 65% stat and pull out maybe an interesting fact or two from that. That's especially useful when we think about posters and think about the distance from which we view a poster. If we're designing something that's that large, typically you'll have 3 different levels of somebody viewing a poster. If we have something around campus, if there's an event or something like that, you'll see something from 10 feet and on, and that's when you're seeing the large imagery. You're seeing headers, the main call to action, whatever it is, that's going to draw you in, right? So you're going to say, oh, like the original example, or even for this one, coffee fact, or an open house. I was like, oh, okay, there's an open house. I want to go see what this is about. So I'll move closer and I'll go inside of that 10 feet. So now we're in like the 6 feet area, and that's when I'm seeing that secondary information that, oh, I see it's upcoming in the next few weeks. There's information about registering. Now I'm even more interested. Now I'm coming in closer to that couple feet, that few feet, and getting the rest of the information, getting the call to action, getting information about the website. Maybe there's a QR code that I'm scanning. So thinking about using these principles, creating form within our text using alignment, and thinking about how we can direct the viewer's eye to get all of that information at all of those different levels and really drawing them in. The next one that we'll talk about is repetition and consistency. This is, along with alignment, this is one of the easier ones to follow, I would say, in everyday work. Being consistent is something that we try to do here at Seton Hall University, and really anywhere. that has a brand to represent an entity like the university or a company. So obviously we have our own brand guidelines. There's set colors and fonts and how to use photography, which photography to use. A great example obviously is Apple. If you look at all of Apple's marketing materials, their television commercials, their advertising, their website, everything is super clean, super minimal, just a few colors, a lot of open white space, negative space, black and white, maybe a splash of color through imagery. But they exude that higher end, minimalist kind of style, and it's repeated throughout all of their brands. So thinking about doing that in your own work, if you're working on a PowerPoint presentation, maybe it's for the university and you're using a university template, but if you're creating your own, if it's for your own course or if you're working on your own business, you want to keep it consistent, right? Repetition and consistency helps your viewer understand who you are and how you're trying to represent yourself. It's like with Apple. If Apple wants you to see that they're, minimal tech focused kind of company, they've done it, right? There are a number of brands like that will do that type of, marketing for themselves. And like I said, Seton Hall, we do it as well. So anybody working on their things, it doesn't need to be, this huge corporate brand guide, but for yourself, when you're working on something, you want to be consistent. So if you're working on a Word document, stick to one or two fonts. So you don't need to use a bunch of different fonts. Make your document set up as a template so that you have headers, right, in the document. You can do this in Word. You can do this in PowerPoint. You can do it in all the Adobe apps. You can set up set guidelines for yourself. So every time I open a document, maybe I have the same color palette that I'm using. I certainly do when I'm working in the Adobe Creative Suite or in the Microsoft Office suite. You can set your own colors, right? You can set your own fonts. So you have all of that stuff. And it just helps not only you look professional and consistent, but in the end, it helps your viewer to understand who you are and the message that you're trying to get across. So the example of Apple, their fonts, their website, everything being really clean and really well established out there. So the next principle that we'll talk about is contrast. So we can create contrast on a page, on a design, within a video, anything through a number of different ways. Obviously, if I have a header next to a subtitle, next to body copy, I'm creating contrast through size. So I know that the header is this more important call out thing, and it's going to lead me into the rest of the information. I can create contrast through imagery on a page if it's heavily weighted to one side. But one of the easiest ways to create contrast that we'll think about is through color. But it's easy to get into a mistake of relying on this too much. So obviously the example on the screen here, we have really good contrast on both of these, right? So I have the cyan on top of the dark blue and then the white on top of the cyan. They both really have nice contrast and they pop out from the screen and you can see them from afar. But if we think about contrast and we're only thinking about color, that's where we're going to run into some issues. So you might say, oh, I want to do a poster and I want to make some contrast between the colors on the page. So if I use a red and a blue, that might work, right? Because they're two opposite colors, right? And they might work really well. What you have to think about, not just the color, but the lightness or the value of that color. So how light or dark that color is. So the example on the screen here, we have two medium value colors. So we have a medium value red and a medium value blue, and they get lost within one another, right? So it becomes really hard to read. It actually does a little bit of effect on your eye when you have colors that are too close in value there. It actually causes like a vibrating effect on your eye. So if you look at it, you can see like, if you look at the edges of the letters, there's kind of like this little like aliasing effect, and it might like jitter a little bit depending on what kind of screen you're looking at or if it's printed. But it kind of hurts your eye. And it's because there's not enough contrast between the two colors in terms of their lightness and their value. Whereas if I take two blues, if I take a really light blue like this cyan and this darker blue on top of it, I get great contrast. It's super visible. It pops off the page and it provides just really good contrast for me when I'm working on something if I want it to really jump off the page. And a great way to think about this when we think about lightness and values of colors is to just don't think about the color at all. Let's think about it in terms of grayscale, black and white. This is an example that I had found on the internet, and I've used it a number of times because I think it's really good to think about the difference between color and then the lightness or the value of a color. So these two examples, these posters, they're both using red, they're both using greens, they're both using blues, but we have different values for each. So on the left-hand side, we're using that really pale green in the background, and then the darker blue and that lighter blue in the background. But if you look on the right-hand side, I got that really dark green, the really dark red, and then the dark blue, and it becomes completely lost. And the way that you can test for this is, like I said, think about it in just grayscale, but convert your document. You can convert your document to just black and white, to just grayscale in the program, or even easier, if you got access to a printer in your office, you can print a black and white version or a grayscale version and see it. And you can see what's happening here with the bad contrast on the right-hand side. With the person's name, where it says Josh Wink on there, the blue gets completely lost once you get into that darker green on the side there. So it's really hard to view. So it's something that you need to think about, especially when thinking about everybody's screen is different, whether on the phone or on their computer. And then when printing, if you're printing something, it's always going to look different. Calibrating a printer between your screen and worrying about whatever someone else's screen looks like, you're never going to get it 100% right. So it's something to think about, that you want to make sure that your colors have sufficient contrast and can work in the context of your design. So the next principle we'll talk about is negative space. So if we're looking at negative space in our document and in that original example, we have a lot of nice white space, negative space between our items. So it provides that kind of breathing room for our eyes to understand the information on the page. So it's super important to think about, hey, I need to have enough spacing between my items here so that it's easy for people to read, not only between the items on the page, but also the spacing between just the individual sentences and lines of text in there. You want to make sure that it's not stacked up on one another. That original example had everything crunched together, and it's hard to read. So we want to think about using negative space to our advantage so that we have an easy-to-read document for our users. Now, we can also use negative space in a creative way. So that example of the poster with the seesaw and all that open space, just like slamming your eye down to the bottom, like forcing you to look down towards the bottom. You have all this open space there. Same thing with the image on the screen, using the negative space to create form there. And a great example of this is the FedEx logo. So the first time I learned about the FedEx, a long time ago, but learning about the FedEx logo, that there's an arrow between the E and the X. They spent a lot of time, a lot of money creating that logo when they originally did, and figuring out how to represent the company and create that logo. And it's something that you don't even notice anymore, but when you look at it, it's like, oh man, that's genius. We're representing the company with an arrow. We're moving forward. They're supposed to represent that they're always on time and fast. And we've done it. They've done it through the design of the logo. It just seems so simple. They squeezed the X and then created the arrow within that negative space. So always a great example to take a look at and see how you can creatively utilize negative space in a design. And then the last thing that we'll talk about is the rule of thirds. So this is something that we'll use when we're looking for photography, for images, and then when we're framing stuff for video. So it's a compositional rule that places guidelines on our canvas, on our subject, whatever we're looking at, and it's intersecting there. And the idea is that across those evenly spaced intersecting lines, the focal point or the more interesting points that our eye will be drawn to happens on that intersection. So within the image example here, we see the professor teaching in class, right in this, right on that intersecting line. It creates something that's visually interesting for us, especially because she's looking out towards the rest of the class. We've got nice negative space. If I were to utilize this for like a design or a poster or something on the web, opens it up from that right-hand side for me to have really great space to put calls to action. Like if it's on the web, a button, if it's on a poster, QR code, some extra information. So it's really something nice to think about when we're thinking about picking photography or even taking imagery. This is an image on campus, and framed that way creates that nice open negative space towards the left-hand side. The statue is almost gazing out into that area. And you can practice this your own. If you're using your phone, you can turn on the grid in a phone, and it gives you the ability to have that rule of thirds grid line. So if you're just taking pictures of your family and friends, want to test it out, want to see how it'll help you out when you're framing stuff, I think it's great to turn it on and have it always on because it makes you think about composition and how you're framing your own photos. So just something that we'll think about when we're utilizing it in design is picking our images to have unique framing, and even framing that we can utilize for our design. We can use that open space to create a call to action, or to put a call to action there. I mean, this one is a perfect example because this is so open now. I can use that left hand. If I was going to make a poster or even like a digital sign out of this, I can make a box on the left-hand side, either through text or by placing a box on top of it and giving the user a bit of information, and they're following the gaze from the statue straight to the information that I'm trying to convey. So if we think about all of those things and relate it to the original design that we looked at, we can see how we're utilizing alignment, right? Everything is creating alignment and form throughout. We're balanced between both sides. We're not overly weighted to one. We're using a symmetrical balance throughout our design. And like I said, everything's aligned. We have contrast through the different headers, through the imagery. We're utilizing the negative space between our items here, so it's easy to understand and easy to see. And we're utilizing all of those design principles that we talked about in a very simple, mostly text-based design. So something easy that you can do yourself, and you could think about all of these principles that we've covered today. We mentioned in the beginning that we do have access to Adobe resources here on campus. If you are on Seton Hall campus or a member of the university community, again, you can go to shu.edu/Adobe. But there's also some other programs or resources that we have available. We have access to Adobe Stock. Adobe Color is great. It'll give you access to create color palettes that you can use in your design, or see examples of palettes that people have made. It's got a great tool where you can upload an image and say, hey, this is an image of, a bed of flowers. Can you take the most dominant colors in this and then create a color palette for me? It's really great to use for your own designs, but even just kind of mess around with, especially if you're using it to explore the community-created color palettes. It's the same thing as we talk about getting inspiration, right? Getting inspiration from posters and from movies and from anything out there that deals with creative media. I'll go to Adobe Color all the time when I'm trying to figure out if I'm starting a design, or I want to figure out, if I have an idea for something that wants to use like a beach palette, so maybe some like soft tan colors and like light ocean blues, you can do that. You can type that in there and see what you want, and it'll give you some examples. And then Adobe Express. Adobe Express is Adobe's online creative tool. It'll do video and design. So it's a kind of first step for somebody who is interested in the Adobe Creative Suite and Adobe Creative Design. It's easy to use, has a bunch of templates. So if you feel like you aren't ready to jump into the Adobe Creative Suite, check out Adobe Express. It'll be really good to get that first start. So that's Adobe, and that's the resources that we have here on campus. I hope that you take some of the principles that we've talked about today and use them in your everyday layouts, even if you're not doing design. I think that all the things that we talked about today can be utilized by anyone to help make your designs and your layouts and even just your general work a little bit more professional and a little bit more easy to understand to your viewer, and have a little bit more polish by using these elements of creative design. Thank you.